Hi again, this is Allison. I am a contributing editor at Tricycle here today with meditation Scott Tusa, who will be discussing the four boundless states, also known as the four immeasurables or the Brahma Viharas. Scott is a meditation teacher and practitioner with over 2 decades of experience. He was ordained as a monk by the Dalai Lama at the age of 28. And he spent the next 9 years continuing his studies in Nepal and India and the US, doing solitary retreats and deepening his practice. In 2008, he began teaching one-on-one and in group settings, which is what he continues to do today. And we're happy that you all have joined. Wow, we've got a really good number of participants. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. As many of you know, today is a mini preview of Meditation Month. So Meditation Month at Tricycle is our annual challenge to practice every day during the month of January. Each year, a different teacher joins and chooses a different topic. And this year, Scott will be guiding us in practices surrounding the four immeasurables or the four boundless states, which is the subject of today's talk. So we hope you'll join us for Meditation Month. Over the course of the month, Scott will share 4 videos in which he'll go into each of the four boundless states and lead us in a guided meditation. Every day of the month, he will also share a meditation prompt that's meant to encourage and inspire your practice for the day. And Scott will also host another live event on January 22nd, where you can ask questions about your practice. All of this information is on our website, tricycle.org. We'll drop that in the chat, but you know where to find us. And we really do hope that you will join us in January. So I will hand it over to Scott momentarily, but I also just wanted to mention that we will reserve a little bit of time at the end of this for questions. So if you have any questions, put it in the chat. And yeah, that's about it. So thank you all for being here. And thank you, Scott, for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Allison. All right. Well, welcome in, everyone. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us for this. Just seeing in the chat, we have a pretty diverse group and from all places, mostly the US, but we got some people from the UK and Ireland and Canada. So thanks so much for joining us, and to the many who are joining in from the US. I am in Mexico. This is where I mostly live. So we've got a little bit of an international gathering. Not surprised. So as Allison said, in this session, we're going to be talking about the four boundless states, aka the four immeasurables, aka the four Brahma Viharas. The approach to these you can find in different Buddhist traditions, like the four Brahma Viharas. You find a little bit more in the Theravada traditions, and the four boundless states, four immeasurables, you find more in the Mahayana traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. And I chose these because these are essential in my practice. For me, these are also essential just in where we are in the world right now, because we're so interconnected. Our lives are, I would say, more intertwined than ever, because, we can get to know someone else's life across, on the other side of the world, not through, letters being sent months later, but through, momentary news, momentary communication, within seconds communication, etc. So because we're so interconnected, because we're so much more in communication and contact with each other, just on a basic human level, it's so vital that we're able to understand where we get stuck within our relational kind of being with each other, where we get stuck with how we hold each other in a sense of innate goodness, and with a sense of warmth and love, with a sense of equanimity, that I think these four boundless states, when taken out of a Buddhist context, are just so valuable for human thriving, and valuable for, each of us as an individual to stay sane, to stay not only awake, but at ease and open to ourselves and others this day and age. So that was one of the reasons I chose them. The other reason is, as Allison shared, I've been, exploring the Buddhist path since I was around 20 years old. So it's been about 23 years of that. And, for me, these four boundless states, there's something that can get looked over because, sometimes there's maybe more, sexier practices out there. Sorry to use that word. I just can't think of another word right now. More flashy practices out there. And to me, these are kind of a staple. Once I realized if I don't have these in my practice, my meditation can become stagnant. The intention for why I meditate, for why I show up to my cushion every day, and why I want to integrate the dharma into my life and meditation in my life, it sort of slows down. It sort of doesn't take this relational approach. Instead, it becomes this approach of, how can I fix my experience in this moment? How can I, make my little bubble better? And I'm sorry to be so direct, but that's kind of my style. So I hope you appreciate that. I think we don't have a lot of time in our life, actually. Our lives are all quite short. Some of us live really, till in our 80s and 90s. Some of us don't. And so I think there's a certain amount of directness we need in our practice and with these kinds of teachings to really take advantage of this human life we have. And so, for me, when I'm stuck in this bubble in my meditation, where there's this strong sense of, how do I feel better? How do I sort of, it's not just feeling better. It's kind of like, how do I fix something I don't like? How do I fix this particular constriction I'm going through, or difficult, thought rumination, or difficult emotion? It gets into a very me-centered experience. And in that me-centered experience, this is just for me over many years, noticing this in my practice, it also makes my practice more tense, more stressful. Of course, relationally, I'm not as open to others. I'm not as happy a person in general. So I think if we want to become just a happier person, whether we want to become awake or not, from a Buddhist perspective, we need these four boundless states. We need to work with them. So that's just sort of my appeal. And there's so much also to mine here, in the sense that, like I said, some people in the Tibetan Buddhist traditions, they might, discover the Tibetan Buddhist traditions and then discover how rich those traditions are with all kinds of practices. And like I said, some of the practices can seem more flashy than others. But actually, if they're not based in the four boundless states, even the higher, more advanced practices, they don't have as much effect. There was maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, I was reading some teachings from a well-known Tibetan Buddhist teacher named Sigar Kongtrul Rinpoche, who you can find some wonderful books on and wonderful content on the four boundless states. And he was just sharing how vital these are in his practice. And to me, he was, at the time, and still, he was kind of one of these figures where I thought, this very advanced Tibetan Buddhist teacher, who I think has a lot of qualities and experience in meditation and the Dharma, he's still practicing the four boundless states. And it was like, oh, I definitely need to do them. So it was actually really inspiring to hear that what's considered a foundational practice is something that this very developed Tibetan teacher still does every day, and actually is part of the core of his practice, his daily practice. So, so these four boundless states, I should probably introduce them now. Oh, and by the way, we'll do a nice meditation today on the first of the boundless states, equanimity. So we're going to work with equanimity today, and I'll talk about that as well. So these four boundless states are boundless loving kindness, boundless compassion, boundless joyfulness, and boundless equanimity. Now, when we order them, they're ordered with loving kindness first, because in the sutras coming from the Buddha, where he taught these four boundless states, boundless loving kindness comes first. But when we actually practice them in most of its forms in the Tibetan traditions, we actually practice equanimity first. And there's a reason for that. I'm going to talk about it in a second. But basically, these four boundless states sum up how we, first open the heart to more warmth, more of wishing ourselves and others happiness and the causes of happiness. That would be the definition of loving kindness. And then allowing our hearts to break open for the world. Now, this is kind of, again, maybe a little too direct for you, and that's okay. You don't have to go there if it's a little too strong. But like I said, I think our life is short and we don't have a lot of time. And so what I mean by allowing the heart to break open is this is the essence of compassion. Compassion is vital, not only for our own well-being, but for how we want to respond and actually benefit those around us. Of course, we all want to benefit people struggling and suffering all over the world. And when we hear kind of news or events that are going on that are difficult for us to hear the suffering that's going on, we want to affect that. And I call that thinking globally, right? And for a meditator, we can think globally in our practice of boundless compassion, boundless loving kindness, etc. And then I say, but what we do is that we act locally, because acting locally is what we can actually affect. And it's our meditation, and specifically these four boundless states, that when we're developing them, they begin to affect our local environment. And what's the most local? Our friends, family, our coworkers who we work with, our neighborhood, right? Our communities. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't affect something across the world. It's just saying, often that's what gets affected first. And so when we're practicing these, we begin to focus on that more. We begin to see results because we start to transform through loving kindness and compassion. And then that starts to affect our behavior. It starts to affect our conduct. I'll say more about that in a moment. But going back to boundless compassion. So, suffering in the world is not new. We don't have a lot of history of the world because not a lot of history is written down, meaning we only have a certain amount that's actually been written down. But we can see in that history or written history, and probably history that was oral before that, just spoken history, suffering is not new. And suffering comes in all kinds of forms. Sometimes it's physical suffering, and sometimes it's more emotional and conceptual suffering, meaning like thought rumination, the different kinds of stories that we weave in our minds, the way we are, working with or struggling with a difficult emotion, or someone we love is struggling with a difficult emotion. So suffering comes in all flavors. And yet we can see that suffering itself, or we use the Sanskrit Pali word in Buddhism, dukkha. Dukkha is pervasive. It's just something that comes with life. And so I think when we really start to accept this, then the next question comes, well, how do I want to approach that dukkha? How do I want to work with it in a healthy way? And this is what the dharma is here for. This is really what I would call like transformative meditation is here for. It's not a band-aid. It's a way to wake up. It's a way to open our heart, and for that heart opening to, how do you say it, affect how we live in the world, how our mind holds itself in relation to others around us. And so compassion, I usually say, it's the practice of allowing our heart to break open without breaking down, right? So allowing our heart to break open without breaking down. That's a big one, because a lot of the times our heart breaks and it breaks down, right? And we suffer. And actually, not only are we suffering, but we don't have much efficacy and agency. We have agency, but we don't have much efficacy in helping. So when we allow our heart to break for the suffering in the world, which is constant, and we allow it to break open, that is the practice of compassion. And so we usually define compassion here in these four boundless states as the practice or aspiration of wishing ourselves and others freedom from suffering and its causes. Okay. And then we have joyfulness. And joyfulness is a very interesting one. It's something I skipped over for a lot of years, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say that, but I just like to be kind of transparent and open here. I'm still a meditator struggling myself and working with my stuff every day. I'm in the trenches with all of you. That's how I like to keep it. And joyfulness is this wonderful thing that actually seems easy on face value. But, I've been thinking about it recently, especially because I've had the privilege to develop this content for you in this course we're offering. And I've been reflecting that actually joyfulness is more challenging. No wonder it comes after loving kindness and comes after compassion in these four boundless states. And the reason is it's really difficult to develop joy in the happiness of someone we don't like, or develop joy in the happiness of someone we have indifference towards, or just don't have a strong connection, or, like or dislike. It's sort of like, yeah, more indifference. And so joyfulness isn't, of course, it's connected to the joy we experience, but all of these are more reflected in how we respond to others. And so joyfulness is really the practice of cultivating a sense of joy in the happiness of others. And I would say, if we're having a bad day, if we're struggling, this is one of the best practices to do. It really transforms my day, especially when I'm struggling with someone, I'm having a hard time with their behavior around me. If I can find something to take joy in, for instance, I struggle often with neighbors who have a lot of loud music, or have loud dogs, things like that. This is a struggle for me. And instead of getting angry, I can work with joyfulness or boundless joyfulness, and recognizing, hey, there's something in that situation that provides either happiness or safety, right? So for instance, where I live, dogs are actually a way for people to have safety, because they know the dog's going to bark when people are walking by, and it creates this sense of like, okay, well, their house is more safe. They're more safe. And also, when people are playing music, they're enjoying, right? I mean, they're not playing music to mess my night up. They're doing it because they enjoy it. So this practice of boundless joyfulness, that's just one example of how it changes the perspective, right? All of these are practices to change our perspective, to shift our perspective. And then equanimity, which is what we're going to practice today, is really the base of it all. As I said, there's a reason we put it first. And the reason is that unless we're developing a sense of equanimity to three kinds of figures in our life, these figures are close ones, like those we like, distant ones or difficult ones, those we dislike, and then third, those we're indifferent towards, those we don't have a lot of strong relationship to, right? So strangers, we could say. And so it's these three kinds of figures that really define our relationships in our life. Now, as anything in the Buddha Dharma, I like to take these more as questions. Of course, just for the sake of time, I'm just framing them as statements. But please take it as a question. Are those the only three kinds of relationships in your life? Is there a fourth or fifth category? Let me know in the comments, if there is. I haven't found one, but if you find one, I'm really open to that, right? I'd like to know. But for me, I really find myself relating to others in one of these three categories. I guess we could say there's a fourth category. That's equanimity, right? That's kind of its own category. So anyways, we have these three types of relationships, and equanimity is the practice of recognizing how bias happens through those three kinds of relationships. So in Buddhism, we talk about bias in a very specific way. Bias is anything that's either obstructing our view of the nature of reality. That would be like the more deep end approach. Or in this case, obstructing our relationships, obstructing an honest and loving way to be with others, right? Because if there's a difficult person and I'm seeing them and looking at them as a difficult person, it's going to be more difficult for me to develop loving kindness towards them. It's going to be more difficult for me to develop compassion towards them. But I just want to pose this question: whether we like them or not, are they any less worthy of that, right? Are they any less worthy of that? And I know this is a difficult question, especially when we get into frameworks of good and evil, right? So I just want to point this out. This is coming from the Buddhist tradition, specifically the Mahayana traditions. Buddhism doesn't have the view of good and evil. That's not a Buddhist concept, right? There is, I guess you could say, virtue and non-virtue, in the sense like there's actions we take with our body, speech, and mind that can cause more happiness for ourselves and others, and there's actions that can cause more suffering. Of course, it acknowledges that. But good and evil is very specific. It has this kind of permanent feature to it, meaning like once someone gets labeled as bad or evil, or the modern form of this would be the word toxic, which I actually am not a big fan of the word toxic. Sorry if you use that word. I think the word toxic is kind of toxic. But anyways, sorry to be opinionated, but just sharing a little bit of that. So maybe that would be the modern equivalent. Someone is toxic. Does that mean they're toxic from they were born toxic? Is that the case? Or does that mean they're gonna, let's say they're 35, when they're 55, when they're 65, they're still going to be toxic? It has this sense of permanence to it. And in a way, actually what it does is it impacts us more than them. Like, I'll give you an example. I mean, I hope you all are enjoying this, but if one of you is not enjoying this and you just think, wow, this is terrible, this guy sucks, does that really impact me? No, it actually impacts you because you thought it with your mind, right? Of course, if you say it to me, I'm not going to like it, so yes, that will impact me. I'm just a person like all of you. But my point is, like, more what we think, how we feel impacts us. I'll give you a really kind of clear example of this. When we're in the car and someone cuts us off, and if we don't, we tend to like veer more to the ragey side of, when we're driving in traffic or something. And let's say we say something, crude, or I know people who will literally have a yelling match with that person who just cut them off with their windows up, right? So I just want you to think about that for a second. So imagine we're having some sort of bad thought or some sort of speech that's aggressive towards them. They don't hear that, right? Our windows are up. They've already passed us in the car. But how does that affect us? I know for me, when I've gotten into those spaces, don't own a car right now. That's not the reason, but I am saved from these kind of road rage these days. But in the past, when I did own a car and drive in cities, I just noticed how negative my mind got, how heavy my mind got when I would let that aggression kind of out, right? So equanimity is so important because it essentially, we could take it from this perspective first. Sure, we could take it from the other side of the street, meaning thinking like, okay, if I'm more equanimous towards others, then I'm a quote good person. I don't know. I don't know if I'm so into that approach these days. It's nice to be a good person, but I think it sometimes gets us into, again, this dynamic of good and evil. I think what's more interesting is seeing, well, how is our mind poised? How are we experiencing ourselves in the world? How are we experiencing others? Are we open to the world? Are we closed? Are we scared? Or are we fearless in compassion, right? In our compassion towards ourselves and others. Are we willing to be with our emotions and thoughts even when they become difficult? Or do we find all kinds of distractions and ways to avoid, right? So again, these are kind of like some deeper questions to ask yourself. And there's no quick fix to this. There's no quick answer. But what I will say is that equanimity does provide the ground for at least opening up some questions about our beliefs, opening up some questions about, our biases, both towards ourselves and others. So what I introduced in one of the videos in the course is this idea of like mainly how we were working with equanimity towards others, right? These three kinds of figures, but we also have internal figures, internal circumstances, thoughts, emotions, etc., that we also can take to be something we like, right? Something we dislike, and something we're kind of indifferent towards or neutral towards. So equanimity actually is, it seems on initial read, it's this practice to become a good person in the world. But actually what it's doing is transforming the whole way we work with ourselves and others, right? Because if that's not happening through meditation, why are we even doing it? Right? What's the point in my opinion? Again, not to be too direct, but the point is to affect our life. The point is to open up a space where we are not, constricted around our life, right? Because our life is our life. We can't change that. But what we can change is our response to our life, our response to how we want to interact with others, as well as, I would say more importantly, how we want to interact with our own thoughts and emotions. So equanimity really helps with that. So I think maybe we'll go into a practice now. Let's see. Probably we're going to do 10-minute practice, maybe 20-minute practice. It's 25, so 35, 40. Yeah, maybe we'll do 10 or 15 minutes. And then we can open it up for some Q&A. But let me see if there's anything more to say about equanimity. There's so much to say about this, but I really think it's so needed in the world, because otherwise we find sides to hang out on. And it's not that we can't choose something. Actually, the truth is we have to make choices, and we have to make choices based on the information we have, right? And if we're a compassionate person, we're going to do our due diligence in understanding something well. with an open mind before we make a choice. If we have time to do that. And if we're crossing a street, we just got to, we got to work with what we got. But if we have time, we can really work with the content of a situation, a state of mind, et cetera, to make a choice, a decision we have to make, to something in our life, whatever it is. And when we're doing that, we're also creating a circumstance where we're allowing our bias to take a rest. We're connecting with a little bit more openness. I would say equanimity also is opening up questions. So that's another aspect of this, opening to a more questioning mind that's willing to sit with something. Even though we might not like something, we can sit with a question about it. And mostly the question is my perception correct? Right? So there's both, is my experience of this and my judgments around this correct, or this person or situation? And we investigate that. But what's interesting here is there has to be kind of confidence and trust in ourselves to do that. And that grows with meditation. I would say the more equanimity we practice we do, that also grows. The more loving kindness practice we do, that also grows, because we grow in our capacity to hold more complexity. I think this is kind of one of the features of Buddhism that I love. Probably it's helped me in the most is being able to open to more complexity and to live with, it kind of goes back to my point around pain in the world. Pain is very complex, right? And the world is very complex, how we respond to that. And it seems like sometimes there's a singular response, but actually that singular response creates another ripple and more complexity. So, like I said, we have to make choices, but it's very difficult to make choices, I think, choices that are going to have the right effect. Me and a friend are talking about, we're going to do a podcast soon together on the right thing to do, because I think it's an interesting question. What does this even mean, the right thing? So this kind of brings me to one last point, and then we'll practice, sorry, which is these 4 boundless states, they're mainly based on aspiration. And aspiration is kind of, I was giving a Dharma talk on this the other day, and I said, it's one of the most unsatisfactory, Buddhist teachings out there, because a lot of us want action. We want change. We want immediate, I don't like this, I want this to change, right? Where aspiration's a little bit of a different approach. Aspiration is cultivating the qualities within us that eventually will spill over into our actions. So I want you to think about this for a moment. If we're not cultivating compassion and loving kindness, where do you think our actions are going to come from? Like when we're taking that immediate action or judgment, where are they going to come from? That's right. They're going to come from our destructive emotions, anger, attachment, ignorance, jealousy, and pride. So the aspiration is one of these things in Buddhism. Like I said, it's kind of unsatisfactory initially, because we see like a lot of Buddhists get criticized for this too, of like, you're just sitting around, you're not doing anything. But it's not true, actually. I would argue too, like what we cultivate in our mind and our bodies resonates as well. That has an impact on the world, even though it's not heard or seen. But let's just keep it to like physical material reality, just for simplicity's sake. Obviously what we think about, what we stew in, what we are developing around our beliefs, around our relational behaviors, how we think of others, how we think of ourselves, that's how our actions, that turns into our actions. Our actions come from there. So these 4 balance states and aspirational practice is a recognition that it's important to do this every day. It's important to work on our aspirations, meaning an aspiration here, a direct one, is the wish for happiness and its causes for ourselves and others. Just embedded in that wording, it's an aspiration. I wish for, I can see Allison here. For Allison, for instance, for Allison to be happy and have the causes of happiness. That would be the boundless loving kindness, right? And we develop that as a practice. We develop that as a state of being, because these four balance states, they're not just lip service. Like if I just say that to Allison, I mean, yeah, maybe it impacts her. I don't know, Allison, if it impacts you, but it impacts her so much more if then actions come out of that, right? That help her life. So aspiration's powerful because we're working in these ways of being and we're changing our state. right? Into a boundless one, boundless loving kindness, boundless compassion, etc. And then, of course, that's going to have an effect. Just imagine if the whole world simultaneously is developing these qualities, that changes how we think and how we view others. So I'll leave it there and we'll do a practice now. So I recommend just finding a seat for practice and just allowing the ramblings of a weird Buddhist teacher to settle for a moment. I'm talking about myself. Yeah, just find a space for yourself, whether that's in a chair or seated on the ground, where you're going to feel okay to practice for about, yeah, let's say 10 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes. We got some time. If you got some question you really want to get out of your head, maybe jot it down now so you don't have to think about it in meditation. Now, the most important thing here with the body is to allow the body to be upright but relaxed, right? If we're too relaxed, we're going to space out and fall asleep. But if we're not relaxed, then the body can't be at ease. And when the body's not at ease, the mind can't be at ease. And we're going to struggle with too much thought distraction in the practice. But of course, thinking distraction is normal, happens to all of us, something we work with. So throughout the practice, just come back to what I'm guiding you in. Just come back to working with equanimity. So we're going to start our equanimity practice just imagining these three figures in front of us. Now, if you're totally new to this kind of practice, please do not bring in, please, I beg you, do not bring in someone you absolutely hate, right? Don't do that to yourself. It's kind of like, how do you say, trying to become a race car driver when you just got your driver's license, right? Just be practical here. This would just be someone, maybe even a close one you had a disagreement with. This would be someone that just annoyed you. Let's use the word annoyed, right? So you're going to bring in a close one. You're going to bring in someone you have a lot of warmth to, and you're going to invite that person to sit towards your left. They're in front of you, but they're here, right? So we're going to make a triangle. They're here towards your left. And then, as I was saying, right in front of you, we're going to invite in, let's just say, an annoying person. It doesn't mean they're always annoying. It just means you had a moment of annoyance with them, just to keep it simple. Now, if you're an OG with this practice, go for it, bring it on, right? Whoever you want. But if you're new, just bring someone you had a difficult moment with. And then to the right, within your vision, but to the right of you, you're going to imagine a person that you have more indifference towards. And of course, we need to know this person to visualize them. So, it's not a complete stranger, but indifference here means you don't have really a lot of information. You don't have a lot of relational history with them. So you don't really have aversion towards them. They don't annoy you, but you also don't necessarily want to hang out with them and have dinner with them. They're not a close one, essentially. Just give yourself a moment to bring these figures to mind. I don't need you to rush. If one comes to mind, but you're not sure of the other one, just let it come naturally. And visual is a kind of word here where it doesn't imply just what we visualize in our mind's eye. It also implies the feeling in the room. So I like to imagine myself in a room here, and actually I'm imagining this presence, these three kinds of presence in front and around me. So a presence means it can be felt, right? Some of you might be more auditory. It could be something you kind of like a sound or their voice that you remember, right? And some of us are more visual, right? And I recommend bringing this person in that kind of energy of that moment. So for instance, you're working with a close one to your left. Bring them in with the clothes they were wearing in the moment where you had a moment of closeness with them. So it's not just a person that we're defining, it's a moment we're defining. Same with the person you had a difficulty towards or annoyed you. And the same with someone you're more indifferent towards. And to give you an idea of indifference, this could be a neighbor, someone who works in a store you frequent, right? There's many ways to do this practice. A more detailed way is really going into each of these characters. But first off, I just want to put it out there, put a question. Do any of these figures exist without our perception? Meaning, like, not them as a person in the world, a human in the world. I just mean the impression we have of them, right? This moment in time that we're bringing back into now to meditate with. Does that exist outside of our perception, right? Sometimes this is the only question we need to ask, actually. And then we can do very gentle kind of analytical or reflective meditation from here. So to give some more information here, just some more kind of seeds or crumbs for you to follow in your reflective meditation is let's take the close one. Let's take your close one here, which also could be a pet, by the way. It doesn't have to be a person. Are they close with everybody? Does everybody absolutely love this person? Did they have this loving moment with them that we're bringing in? Of course not, right? There's people that are strangers in relation to them. Maybe there's even people that dislike them, right? Maybe, not to be too provocative here, but maybe you dislike them recently, right? So I think this is where close figures are very interesting, because often we have moments where a close one became all three of these. Like, we didn't know them at a certain point, so we were more indifferent towards them. We got to know them, and we like them, and then of course any relationship we have, someone's going to become difficult at some point. We're going to have some kind of disagreement, at least annoying. So we can see this person doesn't exist exactly within our perception of being only a close one. So of course we can recognize we also had that moment with them. We shared it. Now, can we apply this to the one we had difficulty with? Are they a difficult person all the time? When I asked you to bring in someone who annoyed you, I did this for a reason, because you could probably also see that you had moments with this person where they didn't annoy you. Maybe they were really a joy to be around, or you had a lot of fun with them, or they really benefited you in some way, but something went wrong, or like I said, it could have just been a moment of a disagreement. So you see already, we have to open our mind here, and this is challenging. We have to open our heart here. We have to shift our perspective. So I want you to have your own journey with this. This is primarily a reflective meditation, which can be challenging because we're using our thinking mind in a beneficial way, but we're also using our thinking mind to help us to develop more equanimity. And then third, we can look at the person we have more indifference towards. And this is a little tricky because we might not know them so well, but we can imagine them in their life, being with other close ones, people close to them, desiring to be happy, right? Struggling when they're suffering financially, physically. And again, we don't have to go too far down the rabbit hole here, just having a cold. So we start to humanize this person. I think that's what's really important with the person we tend to have indifference towards, or the people we have indifference towards, which is most of the world, actually. We just don't know them. We have to humanize them. So we're using our imagination. Now, if you're not much into like reflection through thinking, just use visual images, use your auditory senses. So here's where we're going to open up a whole new area. Just imagining the indifferent person, and also the one we're having difficulty with, enjoying themselves with their family, enjoying themselves with friends. This is not easy with a difficult person, so I just want to name that. So we do have to challenge ourselves here. We have to be a little courageous in the practice to imagine them with someone that's actually enjoying them, someone who they enjoy. Same with the indifferent person, son, daughter, nephew, niece, a pet even. And then, of course, our close one, we already have a lot of moments like that with them, most likely. So we can bring that all in, and we start to see what is really the difference here. And this is where the hard truth comes. The difference is in our judgment of them. Not saying you're wrong. Again, it's not about being wrong or right. It's about opening up a process of there being more to reality than meets the eye. And here, starting to see each of these figures, including our close one, of course, is deeply worthy. Worthy of what? Worthy of love, worthy of compassion. When we really look, what do they want? They want happiness. They want to be okay. They want safety. They want to be free from painful situations. And of course, to us, our close one is more worthy of that. But why? The only reason is because we like them more. So I just want you to sit with that for a moment while you play with these three figures. Now, again, as I said, you can go through each one in detail. We're kind of doing more of a round table here, just noticing how our mind makes distinctions and judgments. And of course, that builds into beliefs and strong emotional reactions. But if we don't start to interrupt our reactions, we're not going to change. And if we don't do that, we become the driver with our windows up, road raging at someone, right? So again, if you need some incentive for this initially, it's not about being a good person. It's about being an awake person, an open person. Actually, I don't think we need more good people. We need more people who are awake and open to others, and open to themselves. And that's what we're doing here. We'll just leave some silence now for a few minutes for you to work with these ideas, just giving you ideas to reflect on and work with. And notice what shifts. If you're have some somatic practice, notice what shifts in your body. Notice what's open. Notice where you're closed. And it's okay if you can't shift that. Nothing wrong with that. We're working on it. That's all meditation is. We're showing up and we're trying. So another way to think of this is, where can you open up the story? Where can you weave some new stories in relationship to these three figures? And one thing I will mention before we close is, if you're going to do this on your own, or you're going to join us in meditation month in January, really take time to take breaks within the meditation. If you find yourself, you're working with a difficult one here and you're starting to get overwhelmed, like a little too much, I would say if it's going above a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10, just take a break, come back to your breath. We're all in different stages of our practice here. Probably some of you are new to meditation. So we really need to know how to regulate within meditation. It's not a race, right? Just for now, we're going to close the practice by thanking each of these individuals. And thanking them doesn't mean we have to necessarily like them in the case of the difficult one, but we're just thanking them for existing because they just helped us. They helped us to reshape our mind, or if we didn't feel like we reshaped our mind and heart, they helped us to move more towards that. Let's at least say that. They helped us to move more towards that. So their existence helped us to do that. Actually, we would say in classical Buddhism, our liberation, our enlightenment depends on others for this reason. Without others, there's no awakening. Just take a moment to thank them. Just letting what we've been imagining and what we've been visualizing just start to fade after you thank them. And just taking joy in your own practice for a moment, just rejoicing. no matter if that was easy for you or difficult, if there was a wider shift or you don't feel like much shifted at all, just showing up to this kind of practice and sticking with it is a big, big deal, actually, bigger than we might think. So rejoicing just means thinking, I'm so glad I got to do that. I'm sealing the energy of that also towards peace in myself and the world. If we want peace, in my opinion, this is where it starts. I mean, long-term peace. Short-term peace can be through dialogue and all these other things. But long-term is like this. Just as you open your eyes and come back into the room, just allowing yourself to sit in the body for a moment, sit with the feet, sit in a place in the body that feels really grounding, just as we reorient. These practices are strong, or they can be strong. So sometimes we need to reorient so we don't sort of shift too much. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for engaging in the practice with me. And we have a bit of time now, 12 or so minutes. If you have any questions, please chat them. And then you're most welcome, Zach. And Allison's gonna read some of your questions. I welcome them.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Scott. That was a wonderful practice, and just great to hear your wisdom. And we're just so happy you're here, and so happy you'll be leading us in January. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And yes, as Scott mentioned, please, everybody, drop your questions either in the chat or in the Q&A. Thank you all for, thank you to everyone who's done that so far. I'm going to go ahead and just field a few of these. Let's see. So I think that probably stirred up a lot of emotion. That practice stirred up a lot of emotion for some of you.
For me too.
As it did in me. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I want to ask this question that someone wrote. I was thinking about it as well. Could you say something more about how to let our hearts break open without breaking down? This person also writes, especially if we have imprints of transgenerational trauma.
Sure. Yeah, it's not a one size fits all approach. That's just the first thing I'll say. I am a big fan of embodiment based practices. It's what I mentor people in. It's what I teach probably half of the time, just because I found it so pivotal in my meditation practice. I started in like very classical Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhism. And at a certain point, maybe 10 years in, I realized I was really disconnected from my body and my emotional body. And what I mean by that is emotions aren't just thoughts, they're also energies in our body. And so for me, yeah, this statement, allowing the heart to break open without breaking down, I say it deliberately as a strong statement, but it's not always the place for people to start, because we need to have our body and mind poised and ready for that, right? And what that means, just in some plain language, I said there's many entrance points. It's not a one size fits all, but one entrance point I find really helpful for myself, and usually for people I'm working with, is we have to be able to at least start working with opening to our own energies, feeling world, sensations, emotions, etc. And there's lots of great somatic awareness practices for this. I teach them regularly, so you can go check out on my website. I also recommend my main teacher, Sonny Rinpoche. He's got a wonderful course called Fully Being, and he talks a lot about these kinds of practices. So I would say that's kind of the starting place, because if I'm, just as an example, if I'm not able to open, now let's leave breaking open aside for a second. Let's just say open. If I'm not able to open to my own difficulty within my own body, and it's not really hold that, it's really to meet that, to let be with that, it's going to be very difficult to meet the world around me and outside of me. right? So for me, it's kind of that inside out approach. Now, like I said, we don't always have time for that for certain choices and decisions. It's just, this is the long-term approach, right? And I found it really transformational in that way. So I'll leave it there. It's really that approach of like how we open to ourselves first, and then we start to open to the world. Because I think a lot of us do it the opposite way. And it's not a bad thing. It means we are a compassionate being naturally. We're born with it. When we want to respond to the world, when we want the suffering to stop. But if we don't know how to first work with our own side of the street, how are we going to be effective to others? It's actually wishful thinking, in a way. So yeah, it's all this approach to our own, embodied experience. That's another meditation month, but actually I do introduce in each practice, I introduce a way to do that in a brief way. I didn't do it today, but I usually do that as a way to enter these kinds of meditations. Thank you for the question.
Yes, thank you. Something that I know you also kind of dive into in meditation month, someone just asked, could you describe a little bit more what you mean by the term boundless?
Yeah, good question. I was going to talk about that today, but it's a whole nother can of worms to open. Okay, how do we want to approach it today? Okay, I'll just give a brief overview of how I see this from the Buddhist teachings and the two approaches we can take with it. One approach is, this practice is relational. It's about our relationship to ourselves as well as our relationship to others. And so one way to interpret the word boundless or immeasurable is the amount of beings we are opening to and wishing to change our relationship to through these four boundless states. And what that means is, I'll give you an example. I'm kind of, maybe I overuse logic a little bit sometimes, but I think it's helpful here. So we know there's like 8 billion humans in the world and counting, right? Somewhere around there. What about animals? Animals, in Buddhism, we also include them as sentient beings. What about animals? Has there been a consensus on animals? And we're including insects and things like that here. No, because it's impossible because there's a boundless amount. And of course, in Buddhism, we also have other realms that are not available to the human perception necessarily. And of course, we live in a big universe, so we could just imagine there's so many sentient beings. It's like way more than we can count. And in Buddhism, they then use these words like boundless or immeasurable. So that's one way to look at it, that we're developing equanimity, loving kindness, compassion, and joyfulness towards a boundless amount of beings. Okay, so that's one approach. Excuse me. The other way we can interpret the word boundless is more related to the teachings on non-duality in Buddhism, what I call the deeper end of the Buddhism pool. And this could really refer to boundlessness more as a space we enter where a meditator, when we're practicing these and merging them with non-duality in Buddhism, we start to open into spaces of our nature, our natural mind, we could say that, right? Which is a mind that's not bound by us and them, or me and you, or I and we, or whatever it is. It's not bound by that. And of course, it respects convention and interdependence, but it's not bound by that. And when we enter that as a meditator, we truly can enact like very vast loving kindness conduct and compassionate conduct, because it goes beyond self and other. So that's another way to think of boundless, more the deeper end side of it, but just to mention, yeah. There's more to say. I'll just introduce it like that.
Thank you. Yes, more to come in meditation month. So everyone follow up and please join us. Okay. So a couple people have brought up equanimity. And so I guess I have a two-part question, but the first part, someone says, I find the near enemy of equanimity, indifference, to be a big challenge. So Scott, can you kind of talk about how you can practice equanimity but not indifferent. And what's the difference?
Yeah, I find it a big challenge too. So you're not alone. I think the thing I'll say is, these are, at least again, I'm teaching these from a Buddhist perspective, but of course you don't have to be Buddhist to benefit from these. I hope that's obvious from how I was speaking this time. But I think in Buddha Dharma, there's this approach to meditation that implicitly understands that it's a practice, right? And that may be obvious, but sometimes I forget that, right? And a practice means that, of course, some things may transform and or change for us quickly, meaning within a year or two, and some things might not. Some things might take 40, 50 years. And indifference, the figures in my life that tend to end up in that indifferent category, I find that to be actually a very challenging piece. Like, actually, some people think the difficult person is hard. I don't think so, because actually we know them. We have a relationship with them. And usually people we have difficulties with are often people we kind of like in some way. I know that sounds weird, but it kind of has this relationship. It may not be always the case, but there's something there, especially when we actually know them well. But with the indifferent person, it's hard because we just don't know much about them. And most of the world is indifferent. Like, I remember when I was living in New York City, and just the amount of people you walk by each day, and everyone's walking by in their, this is how I felt, like little bubble. That might not be the case, but kind of bubble. And then it's sort of like, in order to function during rush hour, you kind of have to treat people as objects. Does anybody else notice that in New York City or a busy city? You just can't get on the train without doing that. And already we've gotten not only the mindset of indifference, but the behavior of that. So it just takes a lot of work, to be honest, and practice on interrupting that behavior again and again, humanizing people at every turn. Where these four boundless states really start to, there's always this, I think in modern psychology, there's this sense of like, there's a tipping point, or modern science, there's this tipping point where like you're going up, and then there's this point where everything has the momentum to kind of go down. And we can use that here as an example where I think when we work on these four boundless states, at some point there's like a tipping point where then our heart just opens, in a different kind of way. It's not saying it's like always like that, but it opens. And then the indifferent people, we're kind of able to open to strangers as like really beautiful beings, where we really see them as like, again, I don't like this word good, but like innately okay. I'll use a different word, innately, like, yeah. So I'll just say that. So it takes time, practice.
Well, that's, I feel like, a really wonderful place to wrap up, actually.
Sure.
We have some great questions, and you all can follow up with us on social media, in our editorial inbox, if you have other questions. Again, Scott will be with us. We're so lucky for the month of January. So consider this your invitation to keep sending us questions. Again, we're going to have a live event, another live event, January 22nd at 3 p.m. Eastern. So, you can ask us questions then, but throughout the whole month, we really hope that we encourage you to get in touch. Thank you all for your questions. And that was, I feel like, a very beautiful conclusion. So, Scott, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited for January. Thank you all. Look out for a recording of this event if you would like to watch it again, and just keep in touch. Scott, do you have, I'll leave the last word with you, Scott. Thank you so much.
No, I just want to thank you, Allison, and the whole Tricycle team. Thank you, everyone, for joining this and just, sticking with us till the end. To me, it's just, we need these kinds of practice so much. So I'm just so happy to spend this hour with you talking about this. And I just really want to encourage you, whether you come to meditation or month or not, if this was interesting to you at all, pursue it. There's a lot of quality content and books available on this. And the most important thing is practice and get the support you need to practice. I think Meditation Month in this sense is just really about some more support for you to practice these. Yeah.